Good morning, everyone, and welcome, as Mark said, to the final day at what has been an exhilarating Bloomberg House in a captivating week. You'll have heard this week, energy has been front and center of so many of the conversations, but often discussed from a perspective of geopolitics, of technology, or capital investment. Today, we're going to take a different tack and talk about people. In Europe, a race to replace Russian gas, an expedited rollout of renewables, and a modernization effort of the energy infrastructure could grind to a halt without the necessary workforce. And with me, I have two people best placed to talk us through this challenge. So let's dive right in. Gentlemen, given all the chatter we've heard in the mainstream media about the pivot back to fossil fuels, Andreas, as the CEO of a global energy company, what trends are you seeing in your day-to-day that confirm or reject that narrative? And how have you seen the notion of an energy transition evolve over the last few years or even months?
It's a very good question, and thanks for having me. I think the trends are clear. We all need more energy, more primary energy. And there, I think the complexity starts, because if we need more energy, we talk about molecules and we talk about electrons. Under the surface, I think it seems to be not so obvious, but we need much more electricity than we need the increase of primary energy. So it means the need for electricity for electrons is growing much, much faster than we have seen in the last decades. So the question is not, is it more or less fossils? The question is how we generate these electrons. And the trend of electrification, I think, is going on. You need to have data center and other drivers. So I would say it's not neither or. We need more energy, and we need definitely a big part more electricity.
Thank you. And Minister, your thoughts?
First of all, I would say we're very committed to the green transition from a European perspective, and especially from an Ireland's perspective, because we have a huge amount of opportunity in our offshore renewable energy. We have, at this point in time in our economy, we use about 6 gigawatts of energy, and we have a build out to 2040 where we have about 20 gigawatts of offshore wind, increasing to 37 by 2050. And we had a very highly successful auction on our east coast recently under our new planning and consent regime. And if I put perspectives on this, if you look from the Irish context, 2 years ago we were spending about 12.4 billion euro in our capital plan. This year we'll go up to 19, so that's about a 54% increase. And front and centre of that is taking the view that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And we're really focusing on housing and the enablers of industrial policy, which are energy, water, those key infrastructural pieces that will allow that transition. So it's a very exciting space. I'm working to try and commercialise the research in academia to ensure that we're getting the skills for the future that will future-proof that investment.
So, Minister, I'll stay with you for a second and stay on Europe as well. Ireland has positioned itself as a skills-driven investment hub. As Ireland takes the presidency of the European Commission in July, what do you think, which learnings perhaps could be applied to help Europe face its skills shortage? Try and say that quickly. Yeah. Skills shortage. But I'm sort of talking about what could reasonably be replicated across the EU.
Well, we have, first of all, the free movement of people through the 27 countries. But one of the big challenges from a European perspective has been administrative burdens. So one of the key things is the new Commission, when it set office at the very outset, President von der Leyen promised simpler, faster and lighter. And that's what we're really going to focus on when we take up the presidency in July, looking at how do we make Europe more simpler? How do we try and ensure that regulatory requirements are proportionate and that you have better regulation? It's not about dumping all regulation, but you need to look at the interoperability of a number of the regulators that are on the horizon. And what we look at in terms of the Union of Skills, which has been brought forward by the Commission, trying to ensure you have that lifelong learning piece, that you're really partnering and having the output from our tertiary educators that reflect a modern economy, that they are really in tune with where the demand will be in 10, 20 years' time. And that's what we're really working on in Ireland. And so many of our areas are focused on that. We're looking at a very significant digital transition, but we're trying to bring hand in glove the green transition as well, because one can very much complement the other and one can actually finance the other, which is critical and very important from our perspective.
Thank you. Going to your perspective, Andreas, where is Europe's skills shortage? So the Minister was just talking about free flow of people through Europe, which obviously is an advantage, but you are going to see, or you believe we're going to see a shortage. Where is it already constraining, hampering the energy transition? Which parts of the system are most exposed over the next 5 years, in your opinion?
It's a very good question. I think there's good news and maybe not so good news. The good news is that we are adding people to our company quite a lot. So we are hiring every year more than 11,000 people and adding
Every year, more than
every year
11,000.
and adding 5,000 net.
Is that in Europe?
Worldwide, I have to say. Which means that we have to process 1.1 million applications every year, besides producing the goods we are doing. So we are hiring. The good news is that at the moment we are not so much handicapped to find people. And I don't know if it's good news or bad news, because we are lucky that we're taking people from other industries which are not having such a growth curve than we have. But that will hopefully not continue.
Could you talk a little bit about that, the other industries that perhaps you're able to take skilled workers from?
We know that everything who is in the electricity sector at the moment is booming. We are growing double digit. We all know that automotive, chemistry, pharmacy is a little bit under pressure. On the other hand, we have a very good image. We are green, we are sustainable, we are doing the right things. That works with young people very well. So we have, from that point of view, not so many problems to find the people. But we have problems to train people, because we have still a lot of manual labor. If you talk about a transformer, for instance, that's a gigantic thing of 450 metric tons. It's a core of copper which have to be stacked by 2 millimeter sheets of metal to adding it up. Then you have to wind copper around it, and it has to be done manually. It takes 2 to 3 years to educate somebody that he can co-work or work alone. And that cannot be speed up. That cannot be automated by robots, and not in the next 5 to 10 years. So the good news is that manual labor is sought after. I think it takes some training, and we are becoming better at that. But the good news is we are finding people. But I can only agree with the Minister, a free flow of people and material in Europe could be improved in some certain things, because we have sometimes to send people around in Europe, and it's not as always that easy as it sounds. There's a lot of red tape behind that we are normally not seeing, but we are processing it in the background, and that's probably could be much easier.
Just following on that, Minister, drilling back down to Europe, dreadful pun, utterly intended. What does the energy transition mean then from an employment standpoint? If there are plenty of people at the moment, there is a shortage for trained people, but this sounds like good news from an employment standpoint in Europe.
Absolutely. When you look at Ireland's perspective, we've about 2.82 million people employed in our economy right now. 1 in 5 people working in our country was not born in Ireland. And that shows you the diversity. And when we meet our clients, it's frequently said that you would have 60, 70 different languages spoken in many of the offices that are ever present on the landscape in our economy, which is a good testament to our diversity. And it's one thing we really focus on then is keeping upskilling and retraining. And I know our colleagues in the IDA are doing exceptional work. They had a 5-year plan, which they're working on now. And then over the 5 years, bear in mind they have a client base of around 300,000 workers in our economy. They set an objective to skill and upskill about 50,000 people over the 5 years. In year 1, we've got to 33,000. And that shows the demand ever present of changing technologies, of embarking on that green transition. And when you create such a demand like we're doing in Ireland in terms of large energy users, and we've come forward with so many policy pieces on that, how we're going to manage that energy demand and that transition, that gives us a huge opportunity to deliver our green, clean energy, particularly on our offshore piece where we have so much ambition over the next number of decades.
And perhaps I'll come back to you, Andreas, to follow on that. But what kind of public-private, we're talking about training as one of the issues, less than bodies. What kind of public-private training partnerships have the greatest potential to scale for you, for all of you across this European ecosystem for energy?
Well, it's something what we are doing already. We have partnerships with universities, we have partnerships with the communities where we have production setups, because we know ahead of the planning what we need. So we are in schools, we are at universities, we are at local societies, to really talk and to try to get the people. And that's working very well. At the moment, I have to say the biggest issue for me in some locations is not getting the people, it's getting the local housing, getting the schools, getting the streets up, because our growth in certain areas is so high that cities literally running out of transportation issues, out housing, schools, and so on, which is a good thing. But I never imagined that I'm talking about social housing and public transportations to mayors of cities, because the growth is really very great.
Do you need to be in cities, or are you looking at outside of cities green spaces where you could perhaps create mini communities?
Well, we are in this business more than 100 years. So we have built actually cities around where we have production sites. And production sites have been created where was the business, and mining industries and other setups. As electricity age started more than 100 years ago, that was just the way it is. So yes, we at the moment investing mainly into brownfield expansion because it's the easiest and the fastest way. We have the people, the processes, we know the communities. We are carefully investing in greenfield. We could do more actually because there's more demand, but it depends on our customer behavior. But what happens if you build a factory greenfield, soon you have housing around it, soon you create a city and a community. That's just the way it goes.
And you're back to the questions about schools and, of course.
And then you're running out of space. If you look what happens today in the big cities, this industrial space 50, 100 years ago, which was in the middle of nowhere, now is in the middle of the city. And then you have to relocate.
But if these steps are not taken, what do you think for Europe, if Europe fails to build out this workforce, what are the concrete implications for the grid resilience, for the critical infrastructure, for the energy security, which has been a dominating conversation throughout Davos this week?
Well, I think from a workforce point of view, it's easy. Investments are flowing where you have a kind of welcome culture, where people want you to invest, where you have the infrastructure, where you have the people available, where you have the customers as well. And we are a global company. We're producing worldwide and literally worldwide. And it's a very flexible supply chain. So if one area is not developing that well, it will be covered up by others. Then you see, of course, economic growth in other areas, but you can supply the equipment. The bigger question is the second part of your question. What happens if we are not building a resilient grid? What happens if the energy transition to a more independent, more resilient network is failing? And that's actually a very critical question, because the grids we see in Europe and North America and most parts of the world are built pretty resilient for the moment. There are a lot of safety factors in. So if you underinvest for a couple of years or decades, nothing has happened. Then normally always say, look, you see, it was not necessary, everything is fine, the sun is shining. But then eventually, and then rather fast, you see the side effects. You see voltage fluctuations, you see maybe brownouts, that the voltage is lower. And on former times, you would have seen that the lights are going a little bit darker than before. Now I would say probably they would go out completely. Then you see probably blackouts. That can happen. We have seen it in Spain, we have seen it in Berlin, we have seen it in other things. And then you have rotating load shedding, that you will live in areas where you have only electrical energy for a couple of hours during the day and not, as we think, on your fingertips. And then, of course, that will hurt economic growth. That will definitely be not easy to recover, because if you're over that curve, to build that resilient again takes a lot of time. But sometimes we are not very good to seeing the early alarming signs.
Well, speaking of time and the time it takes, Minister, what EU-level decisions in the next 1 to 2 years would most accelerate the skills delivery for the energy transition, but also what Andreas was just talking about, the additional factors?
Yeah, firstly, I would just really echo how important it is for countries to really invest in their grid infrastructure, to really take the opportunity that is in the digital transition. And you look from an Irish context, our capital plan over the next 5 years for our grid, for our infrastructure, is about 19 billion euro. If you consider that its predecessor was about 8, that shows you the pace of change that we are going in terms of generation capacity, but also the lines, the infrastructure that bring all the energy around to different parts of our country and that enable economic growth, and that also bring in our large energy users, which are critical for the digital transition. Right now, at this point in time, we've about 22% of our metered electricity is going to our large energy users. Under our capital plan, we'll be able to bring that over 30% by 2030. There are 2 gigawatts of energy going in. And then obviously we're looking at bringing in new renewables into the grid in the years subsequent. And if you look at skills, I think from a European perspective, there's another number of things we can do. I think we have to up our game on interconnectivity. We look from our perspective, we have our Celtic interconnector with France, which is going to be very important. We're going to treble our interconnectivity by 2027. That's with France and also the UK. But also on skills, I think the union of skills is going to be very important to ensure that there is a cohesive plan right across the 27 member states that's low on administrative burden, that really works on lifelong learning, and that looks at where are the skills of the future critically needed. And one thing we really get very well in our country is that working and partnering with academia, because you can do so many things in tertiary education that you can't replicate in industry. But when you work so hard and commercialize that research and bring both of them together, you can get into a very special space, very strong ecosystem. And we've embarked upon that, be it in life sciences, in semiconductors, in tech. And that's why green is so important for us now. And when I look at our budgetary perspective, we've brought about €1 billion over the last year working, partnering with industry on decarbonisation. And some of the most iconic brands in our country, everyone will be familiar with a pint of Guinness. Diageo, such an important company, and such a company that they're brewing for 264 years. And when you look at their plan over the next decade, working in partnership with government to decarbonise shows you anyone can do it, and it can create good, high-value jobs, and also, obviously, it's better for the environment.
You just made me thirsty. That thing you mentioned, the union of skills, is that an actual thing, or is that a term that you're using? Does that exist already, or is it something that Ireland is thinking about putting at the top of the agenda when you take the presidency of the Commission?
It will be one of the areas that the Commission has brought forward this year, an area that will bring a platform trying to really advance the movement of workers, the agility that we need to get back from a European perspective. And when we hopefully take our presidency in July, it will be one of the areas we'll be looking at. But I think top of Ireland's agenda really will be competitiveness. And I will be chairing the Competitive Council for that 6 months. And it's so important that we really get to grips on the simplification agenda. We have about 10 omnibus pieces of legislation that are now on the books that we're trying to get through the European Parliament. It's so important we have urgency attached to those, as well as revising so many of the key instruments and regulations that really have to reflect that Europe needs to get in the forefront of the innovation curve again. And Ireland will be very much focusing on that simplification agenda, better regulation, and we've worked with our partners each side of our presidency to ensure that there is continuity, that if we don't succeed in getting everything through, that the baton will be picked up on the other side.
I have one more question for you, Minister, on this, and I am coming back to you, Andreas, but you could weigh in on this. Where you've described the energy, and that actually was an unintended pun, but you've described the energy in Ireland at the moment for this, for green, for this growth, for this planning, for these collaborations. Where is Ireland in Europe, in the EU? Are you at the forefront of this build-out? Are you in the middle? I'd love to hear what you both think about that.
So we're just about mid-table. It's incredible to note that over 2 decades ago, Ireland had a wind farm, Arklow Bank, off its east coast. But there was a pause, unfortunately, for the intervening period of time. And really when the green transition and acceleration and the urgency has come out through the climate emergency and the work that has been carried out, that scientific evidence, we've had a huge urgency attached. We brought in a new planning and consent regime, set up an independent authority, and we're de-risking it for developers. So what we're saying is there's areas on our east coast that are suitable for development. These are the areas. So it reduces the planning risk, because you have, like you would have in a small town or village, a local area plan, we have a DMAP which really shows the areas which are suitable for development. And hopefully by 2030, we'll have over 6 gigawatts well through development on our offshore renewables. And that will obviously give us more stability as a country, because we know we're price takers at the moment, and that is a big challenge when you're, when you see the international uncertainty, when you see the first war on mainland Europe in a generation and the impact that has had on energy, on inflation. And if we can get more independence on our energy market, which we have the resources to do. And that's the exciting thing about Ireland, not only in offshore, by 2030 we'll be bringing about 9 gigawatts of onshore wind, 8 gigawatts of solar, developing that out and developing the infrastructure. As technology also evolves in terms of storage, we will be very much at the forefront of that. And what we've really done, which is also very exciting, we've upped our game on research, development and innovation. We have a very exciting offering to businesses now, 35% our R&D tax credit, horizontal, available to all, with the support of our agencies. What that means is companies coming in, when they invest in the know-how and the technology, for every euro they spend, we'll meet them with 50 cents halfway, and that's very important for our value proposition.
Maybe I pitch in,
Yes,
because from my point of view, Ireland is a perfect example of the energy transition. Natural resources are not really existing, importing quite a lot. That has led to a build out of a lot of renewables, offshore wind and other things, which is a good thing, because you're becoming more independent. On the other hand, we are all learning now that you can build electrical grids only up to 60-70% with renewables, then you need another form of that. It could be gas, it could be nuclear, it could be hydro, whatever, but you need something to mixture that. And you need interconnectivity, what you are building out as well. You cannot see it as an island. You need interconnectivities to France, to Great Britain, or to other parts for the exchange of energy, because sometimes you have too much, sometimes you have too low. And that's actually the strategy I see worldwide coming, and Ireland is most advanced on that. You have a lot of data centers, which doesn't make it easier from my point of view. But I think it's a kind of prototype of a renewable-driven, sustainable and resilient grid if you're doing all these actions. The only question is how you can become faster on that. Infrastructure projects like that normally taking 6 to 7 years, like an interconnectivity. Only 3 years are really construction and building things. 3 to 4 years are permitting and planning, which is bad for the business case because it's costing money. And I think the fastest way is to cut that down to maybe half of it. And that's something.
Which, Minister, it sounds like those initiatives you were talking about, like pre-deciding that this part of the coastline is available for build-out, and the working with the higher education institutions, it sounds like that is the work that you are trying to do in Ireland to cut that incredible amount of time down in half.
And we have to continue in that pace. I absolutely agree 100% with that. In our new government, our programme for government, we had a target to bring forward an action plan on competitiveness and productivity within the first year. We did it in the first 6 months. And all the actions are flowing from that now, like real choreographed, thought out investment offerings. In our energy, we had the CRU, which is our regulator, set out a position paper where the scope is for industry for large energy users. Secondly, we brought forward a large energy user policy, which is working with renewables firstly on sites where you can have your large energy user in an energy park with your very significant generation capacity. We're going to have private wires, which is coming through this year, which will allow a private wire, that agility we need as a small country to connect to the grid. And we'll have our investment capital plan, our PR6, which is nearly 19 billion euros. So all those are sequenced to send to the market. We're very serious about that. And then on our offshore piece, we have really de-risked a lot of the investment in terms of offering as much certainty as we can. And through our action plan on competitiveness and productivity, we're looking at licensing, trying to make permits more efficient, and trying to look at the interoperability, as I spoke, from a European context of so many of those regulators, and trying to just really, if we look at the Draghi scorecard that set out the challenge we still have to do from the Draghi report, we have a huge amount of work to do, and Ireland really want to reposition ourselves in July to say, Europe, we need to get serious. We need to drive the simplification agenda, get the omnibus pieces through, get the revisions through, and essentially bring Europe again to a very strong growth phase. Because if we get areas like the 28 regime, the simplification methods for new companies, startups, all of those areas, if we can make impact and progress on that, I think we'll have a very exciting opportunity and a very strong value proposition from a European perspective.
I have a couple more questions to get in before we run out of time. So interesting. You mentioned, I don't know if you use this term, but you were really talking about the sovereignty of energy. And I wonder, Andreas, I said at the start that usually we talk about energy in terms of geopolitics and technology and capital, and now we're talking about people, but those other things are really important. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that, are you more optimistic about the pace that all this is going to move at, now that the conversation seems to have shifted from sustainability to sovereignty? Is that something you think is going to move this forward faster?
I think it's going to move that faster. And so I would say it's not a contradiction. Sustainability and sovereignty are different pieces of a medal from my point of view. How sustainable you are is one thing. How independent you are is a different thing. And I think the energy transition is even gaining speed, because if you have no natural resources, if you're importing everything on molecules, you're becoming reliant, because we all learned the hard way that energy security and safety depends as well from geopolitics. You can purchase the things. We have all seen what happens to Europe or to Germany as we have been become too dependent from natural gas. So I think this is just driving this thing in a different speed, because now every country, every region have to find out what are my geopolitical risks, what are the resources I have, what are the resources I'm going to deploy, and what is my local strategy to become resilient, and that can be quite different from country to country. But for Europe, it ends up in a way we only can do that together. We need more interconnectivity between Ireland, even the UK, which is still part of Europe in a geographical way, and from electrical grid part, and all the countries, because we can exchange energy, we can use and leverage that. And I think that's actually speeding up the energy transition in a good way instead of de-accelerating that. And the money we are spending shows that. Your plans are showing that. It's exactly the right direction from my point of view. It is a different set of environment where we have found ourselves in the last couple of years than we have thought maybe 10 years ago. But it's definitely going in the right direction.
So I'd like to finish with giving you both sort of 60 or so seconds. So take yourselves forward into the future, not very far, just a couple of years. Minister, I'm going to come to you first. How do we know that Europe is on track? What does success look like from your perspective just 2 years out?
I think success looks like, and the shape of it is high quality, good jobs for our people. If we get upwards of 3.5 million good green jobs in European context over the next 4 years. Success looks like that we are really back on the forefront of innovation, that we have managed the green transition together with the digital transition, those huge amount of opportunities that are very much energy intensive, but also can finance, help and capitalise other areas of that transition. I think that would be a sweet spot that we could get into from a European context, and that we work on our skills and we future-proof our tertiary education, that we're looking down the line, what are the degrees of the future, what should they look like, how can they be impacted to assist and deliver the skills that we need in a growing economy, and get back to really strong growth from a European context and embark upon competitiveness, really ensure that we're enhancing the productive capacity of our economies, we're working with connectivity, and it's critical what Andreas said there. When I talk about sovereignty, you have to look at, we don't want to be as a continent relying on hostile actors for our energy. We want interconnectorship, that we can work as a European Union, help each other depending on what capacity we can generate at any particular time. I know in our country we can go from 70% to 40% in any given day. And that's why we need to look at other areas too. And obviously there's so many other methods of energy on the renewable side that we're working on in Ireland as well.
Perfectly stated. And last word to you, Andreas, that same question, just 2 years, what does good look like?
Well, 2 years is way too short, I know what I have to produce for the next 6 years already. Let's put the time horizon a little bit out, make it 10 or 15 years, which is probably the right thing for infrastructure projects. If you would have in 15 years one strategy about energy and electricity, what we want to use to produce electricity, how we want to transport that we have one European market, transparent market, and not what we have to do, which is more collection of 27 single markets, where we have an integrated, resilient energy net, where we can transport electrons from one end to the other, where we can have this possibility to be really resilient and safe. That would be a major step forward.
Gentlemen, that sadly is all we have time for. I've enjoyed this discussion immensely. I hope you have. I hope all of you have. Thank you very much. Andreas and Minister Burke.
Thank you. Thanks very much.